Live from Austin, Texas, this is Diversity Cafe, hosted by me, Angela Hood, CEO and founder of This Way Global. Our podcast features HR tech and recruiting experts that know our industry inside and out. They are the best of the best. Join us and enjoy a cup of your favorite brew and get the insight you need to meet recruiting and diversity challenges head on. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Angela Hood. I'm the founder and CEO of This Way Global, and you are here at Diversity Cafe. Today, I have Rachel Hailey joining us. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. I think that she has an incredible background and such an enormous focus in a very specific part of DE&I. Rachel, welcome, and please tell everyone more about yourself and your background.
Awesome. Thanks, Angela. I'm super excited to be here. So I'm Rachel Hailey. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm with DEI Outdoors. We are a consulting firm that provides diversity, equity, and inclusion services specifically for the outdoor spaces. We offer coaching and audits and long-term training programs to ensure success over time. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Well, and the thing that I think is so unique about your company is obviously you're focused on DE&I, which is incredibly important, very topical right now. Right. But the fact that it's focused on companies that are outdoor companies, yes, really was so relevant to me. And I'm going to give you a very quick story why. So I come out of the construction engineering space before I was in technology. Mm-hmm. And part of the origin story of our entire company is the fact when I would apply for jobs, I would have to not use Angela. I would have to go to my initials, which are AL, right, so that people would maybe think I was a guy. They certainly wouldn't scream, oh, this is a woman that's applying for this job. Mm. And one of the biggest reasons why is because they did not think I could cut it outside in an outside job. Mm. I found this the most shocking revelation in the beginning of my career. I was like, of course I know it's outside. I'm in construction. That is the whole point, is that you're not having to be behind a desk all day. So can you talk a little bit more about the bias just in the most basic of things, mm-hmm, and the fact that the companies that you work for hire people that need to be outside?
Yeah, I think, I have my own lived experience with this too, Angela. It's interesting across multiple fields. Before I was in the DEI space, I was in the chef space. I went to Johnson & Wales University. I have a degree from there. And I saw a lot of similarities sort of between those two industries in that there was like an enormous gender bias about like what women could or couldn't do in the space, So one of the most rewarding things I think about my work now is really taking the gender inclusion pieces and having them translate to even broader populations, because I think there is a certain culture in the outdoor spaces that really speaks to, you got to be tough or you need to be strong. And there's all this, gendered language and biased language that we use to really describe the people that are in the space. Yeah.
So when you're talking to the companies that are your customers, so first let me ask you this question. Do you work with companies of all different sizes, or do you have a specific company size you focus on?
Yeah, so the distinction I make around the work that we do is we really meet people where they're at, right? So anything from startups to like the really big companies, of course, any way that we can create this work, we want to do that. Specifically, our focus now has been in the outdoor education sector, outdoor recreation, and then also in outdoor retail. So being able to support and work with organizations like that, we really pride ourselves on, yeah.
And so when you're coming in contact with them, do you find that smaller organizations are different than the larger ones as far as how they tackle the DEI space, or do they all have sort of the same challenges, just at different scale?
I think so. Historically, they have many of the same challenges at a different scale. One of the most common things that I see that is different between larger organizations and smaller ones is that typically, the leadership at the upper echelon is really bought into this work. But the trickle down, we don't see it as effectively in large organizations, because as you start looking at regional practices, it's really important to make sure, like, what are we doing in our location in Franklin, Massachusetts versus what are we doing in Mesa Rim, California, and really saying, how does what leadership is declaring they want to stand for and be playing out in real time and in real life. Yeah.
And so with that, one of the recent conversations I had was I had a guest that we talked for probably 20 or 30 minutes just about pronouns
Yes.
and the why are they a thing? Why are they important? Why do other people don't even want to talk about them? So I noticed that you have she and they. Can you explain just to if someone were to ask you as a client and they said, why is this important? What does it mean? And why do people share them in advance of you even meeting them?
Yeah.
Purpose.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, the reason I share them is I really believe in like walking the talk of what I'm doing. So just by sharing my pronouns with others, it allows the space for people to share theirs if they choose to, or don't if they don't. But they know that, I'm sort of, it's my job to risk first and to be open and make sure that folks can have that same level of vulnerability if they choose to go there. For me, is the in terms of the why, it always comes back to what's the human element here. How can we relate to others, whether it's through pronouns or it's through the work that we're doing or the type of field we're in, whether it's an outdoor recreation or some other facet of that, line of reasoning. But I think for me, I share them very much to create like a space for people to speak to that if they choose to do so. Yeah.
Well, so it's a somewhat of an open conversation starter, I guess, for you with your clients, but also, do you think that this is a good way for leadership in companies and managers in companies to convey to the people that report to them to say, we can have an open communication about this?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it does go quite a long way, right, for folks to have their pronouns out there. And in some ways, when it comes to company culture, I've been a part of organizations that even in outdoor recreation, they'll have the name of the person on the helmet and the pronoun right underneath. So again, it sort of creates that space for people that they just met a few minutes ago that are about to go on this wild adventure with them to be open and be free, right? Be vulnerable and be who they are authentically. I do think we run into the risk of sort of ticking the box, so to speak. Like if there's no intentionality behind the like really sharing the pronoun or pronouns. So I think there's work that always gets to be done there first and saying like, well, why are we doing this? What's our reasoning behind it? Is it just something we're doing because it's like, the on trend, the cool thing to do in this moment? Or is it something that we're really committed to doing long term? And we know why.
So, all right. So tell us, why should a company really invest in, number one, sharing why the intentional part of this matters? What would you say are the things they should not ask and the things that they absolutely should be willing to talk about?
So I think the first piece is really, communicating that commitment to inclusion, right? Like organizations should be able to speak to why the work is important. And I think it's individual for each organization. Like I know why I participate in this work and I know why it's important to me. I have a daughter who I think about, in the future as a biracial child, like what's her experience going to be and what are the outdoor spaces I'm leaving for her after I'm gone, right? So that's my own personal reason why. But I think when it comes to the organization, there's got to be some clarity around what is it that we're actually saying we want to do, and really knowing that, and not just having it be like a concept, but something that lives and breathes in the DNA of the organization every day. Yeah.
What is the part that you think people should steer clear of, though? Like, what is it that they should not ask?
So I think in terms of what people should steer clear of, I think call out culture, meaning like, hey, what are your pronouns? Like asking somebody directly that question, because you may unintentionally out someone, right, who hasn't yet had that conversation. I think the other piece is really around, again, sort of creating this idea that someone is beholden to us to share information that they may not necessarily want to share yet, right? So, right. And also, what we should not do is if we do misgender someone, or if we, do use wrong terminology, right? And having that defensive-ness of like, oh, I didn't mean it, and overly apologetic, like we don't need to go there, right? It can be a simple, straightforward thing, rather than a really drawn out long apology, right? Which ultimately brings the responsibility away from us as the, person that's made the mistake and puts it on to the other person.
Right. Well, and so we have gender fluid people in our company and also in my family.
Yes.
And I will say this, and I'm very transparent about this too, that I have to practice before I see them, because I think of them very clearly in one way because I've known them their entire life.
Right.
They think of themselves differently. And I obviously respect it. It's just, it's difficult if you've known a person for so long to just switch automatically. And so I do. I know it sounds funny, but I actually practice, like, how am I going to say certain things? How will I start either with their name or using they or them? Yeah, it's just, I think because I am transparent about it, and I say, I'm trying, I'm doing the absolute best I can. It's just, old habits are really hard to break. And I think that we need, just as communities of people, regardless of it, if it's family or if it's coworkers or neighbors, or, you know, I do think we've got to be, like you said, not overly apologetic, and also be respectful at the same time. And yeah, if we are all trying to find strike a good balance, I think that it comes across exactly the way it should be, which is it's respectful. We'll all get there, but it is relatively new, and I think companies are really struggling with how do they even get started. So I really love the fact that you shared that, because it will help probably untold number of people that say, okay, I can say that, but I can't say this other thing.
Right.
So let's talk about your specific work. So you're working with companies that primarily are outdoor companies of all types across the entire U.S. of all sizes.
Yes. Time.
Would you say that one of their biggest challenges is around gender, or do you think that they are equally challenged with ethnicity?
Yeah, I would say gender inclusion has come a long way, right? In terms of the outdoor spaces. For a long time, it was this sort of bro culture, like very masculine, you know, like patriarchal sort of feel to it, right? But over the years, I think there's been a lot of growth, and very intentionally so, done by a lot of really passionate folks that are committed to the work. So I think now, you know, the work that I do is more centered on historically marginalized and underrepresented communities. So, you know, whether it's looking at hiring a more diverse staff in way out there, wherever you are, whatever rural town you're in, right? What are strategies for that? And then also providing training for staff around, okay, knowing that we have a new population that wants to either enter into the space or into the sport or into the market, or a population that has participated before, but maybe kind of more wallflower on the sidelines, right? How do we communicate and interact with people in a way that supports them, right? And has them feel the sense of belonging that I think we're all looking for, you know?
Well, and the customer base for outdoor activity is probably one of the broadest as far as ethnicity and gender, age. The something that I love about outdoor activity is you can just take a walk and you can be in your 70s and 80s and you can still walk miles.
Absolutely.
And you can be a 2-year-old, and also you can be hitting the trails, you know, and there's not that many things that are so equal for everyone. For me, the greatest thing about DE&I is the fact that if you have a more diverse team, you can better address your customer and understand your customers.
Absolutely.
So how do you see that translating very specifically in the outdoor space?
Gosh, the representation piece is so critical, Angela. I speak to this all the time because I can speak to my lived experience about it, which may help shed some light, right? It's so important that the staff and the leadership of these organizations are representative of the populations that they serve and they want to serve, right? If we're talking aspirationally or whatever. For me, I was a city kid, right? I grew up in Roxbury, Boston, which in the early 80s was like a very city-centered lifestyle. It was kind of like a hard up town, right? Until my brother and I, when we were kids, our parents moved us to Middleborough, Massachusetts, which is the cranberry capital of the world.
Cranberry capital.
Yeah, totally. It's where ocean spray is.
Every day.
Yeah. So for us, you know, I went from really tall buildings to like miles of cranberry bogs, like hello. And for a long time, you know, my family was the one of two Black families like in my graduating high school class for sure. And for a long time, I really struggled with that, right, as a kid. What shifted the game for me was this really incredible sort of serendipitous thing where my mom picked up a second job as a camp counselor at a YMCA camp called Camp Humicus. And they really had done their work in terms of increasing diversity in their staff. And this was in the early 80s, right? So for me, when I found a camp counselor that looked like me in a sea of white faces, right, in this like racially and ethnically desolate town that I lived in, I was like drinking that like water, you know. I was so excited just to be around people that I was like, okay, I can relate, you know. Maybe even as a kid, I didn't understand that that's the connection that was actually happening. But many years later, looking back, it's like that one experience with the camp counselor on the ropes course on a Thursday changed the entire, you know, scope of my life and my relationship to the outdoors, you know. So
And that is just, I mean, so have you ever been in contact with this counselor?
I haven't actually. It's sure been on my list of people to hunt down. And I've spoken with the camp recently in the last couple of years and just, you know, expressed such gratitude and just love for the work that they had done, and really being able to, like, you know, bring up the youth in a way that I don't think would have been possible, you know, had it not been for Camp Humicus.
Well, that's such a huge testament, though, to exactly what you just said. They were apparently leading the way, because in the 80s, not a lot of discussion about diversity. We were barely in the part where we were racially integrated. You know, I think people were still trying to figure out how does that even look, which is shocking when you look back on it, but it is absolutely the truth. And then if you think, like, so you had this interaction with the counselor. I love the fact that you even know it's on a Thursday. That is like
every Thursday. Yeah.
Do you remember what you were wearing? Like, do you have those kind of visuals?
Totally. So I can remember, like, down to the smell, right? You know how like smells are really powerful. It's pine boughs. I remember like pine sap, and it almost like the sound of my feet hitting the compressed dirt, because the trails at the camp were like so well worn, you know. And I remember being in like a pair of little like gym shorts and a t-shirt, but I used to get teased a lot about like my hair, because I had really full hair, and, you know, kids, right, and my lips were big and all these things. So I remember feeling really self-conscious until I put on the harness and the helmet, and all of a sudden I was like a superhero. I was like, you know, felt really strong and tough. And I'll never forget it. We ended up doing the high ropes course after they sort of worked us up to it. But we went up into the high ropes course, and it was like all of a sudden, like way up there on a, you know, limb in a tree, I realized it wasn't what people said about me. It wasn't that I was like this city transplant, like city mouse, country mouse. I just got to be whoever I decided I was going to be in that moment. I could be free. I could be courageous. I could be a million things, you know? So it was really beautiful, for sure.
Well, and it also sounds like you were quite fearless. I mean, you know, so I do know, because I've gone through ropes courses through other reasons, and I've done rock climbing in Colorado. And the one thing I have to say about this, which is why I'm fascinated by the work that you do, is to me, it was one of the most stress relieving things I could ever do. And the reason why is because I could not contemplate anything having to do with work, because I was so worried about falling or not paying attention to the instructions of what we were supposed to be doing, because it is terrifying to be up that high simply on ropes. And especially for a person who likes to be in control. I was like, I am not in control right now.
Totally. And that was one of the fun things that, you know, one of the greatest things about rock climbing for me is that I actually started climbing way later. I was like in my mid-20s when I started rock climbing. And it was because I was working these like 14-hour days in a kitchen, right? And there's not a lot of windows in kitchens. So like I could tell what season it was by what produce came in the door. I was like, oh, tomatoes, it must be summertime out there. Or like, oh, beets, it must be fall. And I remember thinking, man, I need something to do on my days off so I can just blow off steam. And climbing ended up being the thing. And it was exactly that, Angela, where it was like, I had to be present in the moment to what I was doing. Like, where's my next hand going to go? Where's my next foot going to go? And all the other stuff, all the other stress or life stuff, it just sort of fell away in that moment. So
it takes everything you have in you to be able to do that. And just the fact that you are not only helping people that are doing something very difficult like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're
Mm-hmm.
instructing other people to do those things that
Mm-hmm.
are also very difficult. But then on top of that, you're layering in, and you need to be inclusive, and you need to attract diversity.
Mm-hmm.
That is a tall order that your company is delivering
Right.
on. Do you feel like that when you are going and talking to these people, do you feel like that they are feeling overwhelmed, or are they able to embrace it? Are they at a point in their own journey because they contacted you?
Right.
They
Right.
have space for it.
Yeah, this is a mixed answer for sure. Because I'll say this, there are organizations that are like really bought in, and they're like, okay, we're going to make this happen, right? Outdoors for everyone, right? So what do we have to do? We're dug in, we're ready to go. And then there are other organizations that are like just barely dipping a toe. They're like, we heard that this is something that we should be doing, and like, how do we even start? And then there are folks that are in what I call analysis paralysis, where they're just like stuck, because they know they need to do something, but there's an inherent fear in this work of, I'm going to mess up, I'm going to say the wrong thing, or I'm going to make a mistake, or, I'm going to use the wrong terminology, right? So sometimes what I see is folks get frozen in that narrative and they just never begin, right? It's just, so then it becomes, we don't have the bandwidth, or we don't, have, the means to do it right now. But really what it comes down to is, first you got to pass through the fear and the discomfort of like, okay, how are we going to have this happen before we can begin?
It's so ironic, the fact that there's some of these companies that are teaching the rest of us how to do these courageous things outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they are gifted at it. They're specialists at it, and then they're having trouble making their own kind of courageous leap to what shouldn't be a new world, but it is. I think we all have to be really honest about this, that DEI is on its leading edge. Like, the best companies in the world have adopted it, but there's still plenty of companies that haven't even gone there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say there's a piece, that's specific to the outdoor spaces right now. And I say the outdoor spaces, but what I'm really speaking to outdoor retail companies. I'm talking to education companies and outdoor recreation organizations, and saying there is a relevance piece to all of this, right? Because what we're seeing is an increase in historically underrepresented and marginalized communities participating in the outdoor spaces now, more than ever. And to stay relevant as an organization, this work gets to be a part of the organizational structure, like from the ground level, the DNA of the organization up, so that we can really continue to live and breathe, the things that we love to do, which is have people explore, play, discover, so there's that piece too. If it's not like, are we on the right side of history in this work? There's also feed your bottom line, because there are new markets that are coming in.
Well, and that's an interesting point. So are you saying that what you're seeing in your own market, the outdoor market, that the growth in the industry is happening in the diverse populations?
Absolutely. And the pandemic can speak to, I can speak to that so adamantly, in that we saw it with, 2020 was the year of the great reveal, right? It showed us so many systems that were working, other systems that were ripe for change. And one of the things we saw, especially with, we were all like quarantine crazy. We were like ready to get out, to play, to do stuff. And in rural areas, we were seeing an increase in the drive to and from like city traffic. So here in the Northeast, it was like in Western Massachusetts, we had clients that were seeing this huge influx of populations coming in from Boston and New York, and saying, let's just be outside, right? Because everybody was sick of being inside. Right. So trailheads were packed, and, we were seeing more hikers of color, right? We were seeing people out there in all walks of life, many different backgrounds. And it became this conversation of how does the rural community, the outdoor recreation community in this rural area support these new populations coming in, and have it be a collaborative experience and one of like stewardship and inclusivity, rather than like, oh, these people should know where to park, or like, oh, these people should know where to put their trash, Yeah.
Well, I think that we certainly saw that from the national parks. They were explaining that across the entire U.S., there was more demand for people to be able to go to the parks, because they did feel like that they could be safe, and also that they could be around people. I think this was another realization is that, we are somewhat of a herd mentality. And so we want to be around other people, even if they're not. So I'm an introvert, so I don't want like oceans and oceans of people surrounding me all the time.
Yeah.
But as an introvert, I found it so odd that you just weren't around people other than if they were, quote, in your, what was in your bubble, right?
Yeah.
Your bubble, you could be around them. And so we saw it. I live in Austin. Our office is headquartered in Austin, and we have teams in Boston and in Silicon Valley. And so all three teams saw a very different thing happening where they were. And in Austin, what we saw was tons of people out walking and riding bikes and on the trails and trying to get, also too, they couldn't go to the gym anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
So then if you're going to get your activity or exercise, you really kind of had to go outside if you didn't buy gym equipment.
Right.
So this huge dynamic changes. And I think it's so great that you are there for them to go to, because I don't think diversity and inclusion are the same for an in-office type company as they are outdoor.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's different things to be considered. There's, I think, different conversations, and the impact that COVID had on your business and your customers.
Yeah.
Massive. Both, it sounds like both positive and negative, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in so many ways it really challenged the narrative about like what an outdoorsy person looks like or is, or who they are. In the same way that we sort of spoke to like, well, what's an outdoor professional, right? How do they look and what's the job they do? I think it was the same for the pandemic. Really rolled back the curtain on, outdoorsy could be walking in the park, on the way to Ruggles Station in the middle of Boston, right? Or it could be, hiking the AT for 3 months, So really, what is outdoorsy? And then how do we support people in that narrative?
So what would you say if you're an outdoor company, and regardless of the size, but if you're an outdoor company and you're kind of looking around at the touch points that your company has with your customer base, and if you were to analyze them and you're like, not very diverse, like pretty much everyone's sort of the same as one another.
Yeah.
At that point, what is the next step? Like, what do they do? And what are the questions that maybe they could ask their own team to start addressing the baby steps? Like you said, tip your toe in.
Yeah.
How do you tip your toe in a way that makes sense?
Well, I think it's a number of things. First and foremost, there's got to be a culture of discovery and compassion. I call it a learning culture. People have called it many things. But before we even begin these conversations around what action should we take and what do we do next, first come to the table and say, how do we want to treat each other as we're having these conversations? Like, what are the norms and values that we want to adhere to as we're doing the work of fostering DEI in the organization? I think that is absolutely the first step. So that, again, you can create a space to really be open and share freely about, what's happening, right? Because step 2 is really about looking at objectively at where are we, what have we created so far? What is the objective version of our organization, right? Like, can we point to certain metrics? Can we say we might have a really diverse field staff, right? At the ground level, we're looking pretty good in terms of like, gender, ethnicity, all that. But then when we get up the upper echelon and we start looking at the board level or at the, leadership, what does that look like? Right. So that we can begin to notice some trends, right? Or notice some markers to solve for, so to speak. And then we can start to reverse and engineer and say, okay, given all of that, our commitment to the work, here's how we're going to treat each other. Here are some possible places we can start to move the needle, right? Maybe it's hiring and recruitment. Maybe it's retention. Maybe it's outreach to the community. I don't know. They're individual to the organization, right? Only then can we start to say, okay, so what, now what? What can we do from here?
Yeah. So to your point, we hear often from candidates. Okay. So these are people that are looking at the jobs that our companies have brought in. We send them the job, and we're focused on trying to help these companies increase diversity across all different spheres. And what some of the applicants will come back and say, I really love the job, but when I look at the company,
Yes.
I don't see myself in their leadership, and I'm concerned because I feel like I'm not going to be able to progress my career there.
Right.
And that's the signal that gets sent. It's not that they're worried, at least the ones we talk to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they're worried that the company's a bad company or that they're not a fair company. That's not the challenge.
Yeah.
It's just like they don't seem to really want anyone at management or at leadership to be diverse. And I want to get stuck. Right. And so then they tend to just not even apply. And I don't think companies can see this. And so I think your point is so valid that this is really happening at outdoor companies too, that the leadership being that it lacks diversity. Yeah. The DEI statement isn't enough. And just because you put the stock photo of different people in one picture, a lot of people really think is, we've really, put together an effort here. So I find it interesting. Doesn't seem to matter what kind of job it is, and that regardless, people want to see leadership being diverse.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and I think especially in the outdoor spaces, it's a process. It's going to be a process, right? Because what's happened is there are systems in place that have sort of brought into the mix a certain level of privilege and oppression that we have to look at. Okay, here's where we are now. How did we get here? And how can we dismantle this practice, right? And so much of it is implicit. We don't even realize we're putting up blockers in our job ads, right? Because we're using this highly gendered language, just as an example. So I think there's work in every field, but especially in the outdoor spaces where you can say, where are the places we've inadvertently been blocking people from being in these leadership positions? And how do we break the cycle, right? The other piece that came up for me as you were talking, Angela, is, imagery, right? I cannot stress this enough, be honest, right? If you are committed to this work, there are ways to communicate your commitment to inclusion and do it in a real and authentic way, because there's nothing worse than being one of the only, right, on staff when you show up and you look around and the room doesn't look like the photo, right? Because with our images, we're putting a promise out there to the world, right? And if I show up and I'm the only woman of color or the only person that looks like me in whatever package body I come in, right? Then I'm going to feel all the more vulnerable. So just be real, be revealed about not just your current state of affairs. Yes, our board is primarily white male and in their 50s. Just be real about that. And also communicate your commitment to inclusion and action steps that you are taking to change the game.
Oh, and I think so. My first job out of college, there was 364 men and me. And I was cool with that. I was like, it's fine. I knew that was going to happen. I didn't know it was maybe going to be that extreme, but I knew there was going to be a difference. But then they gave me a pink hard hat. I was like, really? So I think this is the other side of it, is that, we at least tell our customers is, get someone else from your team that is also diverse to help you figure out how to say these things and what things to do and not to do. Let them be a mentor for you as a company leader, so you don't make some of these mistakes, because you're absolutely right. Just being transparent about it is better than trying to act like you're something that you're not, because the candidates are digging in. They are going into the About Us pages of these companies.
100%. Yeah. And I think we see it so frequently. I mean, I know for me, that was when I was looking way back, initially at where am I going to land, for my next outdoor adventure, for my next outdoor job, the first thing I did was go to the staff page and take a look at who was on staff and what the photos look like and all of that. And then I went to company values and all, so I think now more than ever, we're seeing the new generation of folks coming in saying, is it a values driven company, and can I be my authentic self in this organization,
Yeah, it's interesting, even in our own company, and I talk about this when I give talks, is that we have, if you were to just look at the picture, you'd say, oh, you have a lot of white men that work for you. You actually dig in, you find out that they have mixed ethnicity. They have veteran backgrounds, which are very much a group of people that have these same kind of challenges. People always think that they're going to be militant if they come to work for you and things. And so I do think it's very important that companies are transparent, that they answer the questions, and that candidates also don't overly judge by a picture. That whole don't judge a book by its cover. I think a lot of times people can be diverse in ways that you don't realize. We actually have a couple of people on our team that are neurodiverse, and they have said that in other jobs they really had challenges because the quote disability that they refer to, I personally think gives them superhero powers. While it might be viewed as disability by someone, for us, they're just enormously great at what they do in our company. And it's because of this thing that makes them a little bit different. But that is, we don't have a label on our foreheads. That's that. And so I would say that we need to all, I think, maybe give companies a little bit more breadth to be able to share how their company is diverse. I know that my team is very open about it, but it's partially because of what we do. Technology company. So how would a company go about sharing their real, you think, like, should they do a graph to show their diversity? How can they be more transparent about it in a way that it's easy for a candidate to understand?
So I think it's a two-part communication first. Well, we'll call it three. The first is, as you were saying, really decide what you're going to report out on and what the scope of diversity means for the organization. Because absolutely, I'm a veteran too. I do a bunch of work in the veteran community, and there are lots of different groups of people that look. DEI is not just about the ethnicity, race, and gender. Okay, there's such a broader scope and spectrum to really look at when we're saying what does diversity mean, and then we can start analyzing the numbers, right? The second piece in my mind is really data collection, right? So there are great resources around polling and surveying your current staff, for inclusion, and then being able to report publicly on those numbers is kind of the third piece. I would suggest, and again, in terms of authenticity and realness and being open, make your numbers as much of a conversation in your quarterly meetings as, your P&L, right? And really have it be something that leadership can speak to, at a moment's notice, to whether it's a candidate walking in the door or if it's somebody that catches them at the water cooler. Know your numbers and have a willingness to share not just where you are, but what your goals are, and again, action steps you're taking to get there.
So really make it part of your KPIs as a company and your scorecard on, and would you say a monthly or quarterly basis? Like, what's the frequency?
I think quarterly is a great place to begin, right? Because then you can look at strategic planning in the long term. But of course, given quarterly goals, you want to reverse engineer and say, okay, how many by when this month, or what does this look like? How many community events are we doing? Outreach events? There's lots of different ways to decide how to do the work, but there's a saying in research: what gets measured gets done. There we go. So really being able to stop and say, what is it that we're doing now, and where are we going later?
And I think too, one of the things I learned in my own company is that because we were focused on diversity from the very beginning, we started with the mindset that everyone in the team had an equal voice in innovation. Now, they didn't have an equal voice in our financials and things like that. We need our specialists to be handling that. But with the innovation perspective of our business, we would put out any kind of challenge we had. We would say, everyone, here's a problem we're trying to solve for. Whatever ideas, whatever thoughts, I don't care if they sound crazy. Just say them, because we really wanted to hear them. It was so, I would say, shocking, and it was because of my own bias at that point in time. I hadn't really benefited from such great diversity yet, so I was biased about it. But what we found is that some of the least experienced and youngest people in the company had the most innovative ideas that were ones that could be implemented relatively easily and could be measured and actually worked.
Right.
Very relevant innovation ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And to me, that is what caused me to invest more in it. It kind of changed the culture of our company. So what is an early test, or what is a way that leadership could task their company with something for their own current employees to be able to demonstrate how diversity can work for them?
Well, I think that's what you shared, Angela, is a really great example of really saying, putting the questions to your change agents in your organization and really saying, hey, here's where we're going, right? We've identified this set of challenges, this set of blockers. And I feel like the organization gets to do some homework ahead of time, right? Because we do, especially if they're folks from marginalized communities, we want to protect our folks against basically offering up their lived experiences or their trauma, right, without some kind of recognition, compensation, protection, whatever, right? So there's that piece. But then, going to your change agents and your folks that are really passionate and saying, having it be a collaborative experience rather than, hey, fix this problem, or hey, solve that, right? Because that's the beauty of diverse teams, right? And really saying that everyone's voice is of full value here. And we know that solutions can come from the head of the snake or all the way down to the tail, right? And back again. So really allowing the space, I think, for people to bring their ideas to the table is huge. Yeah.
And I think seeing it is believing it. And I know that I had to go on this journey myself. And we didn't start off as diverse as we are now. And we continued to increase the diversity in our team because we saw the benefit of it. Ultimately, we're a business. Yep. And every one of your customers is a business. Every one of our customers is a business. It all comes down to ROI.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I'll just speak to, there are so many new populations wanting to come into the space, that it makes sense to be doing the work now and saying it's almost, it's almost akin to, I always go back to like the dinner party reference where it's like, we got to make sure the table is set. We want to have everything in place, everything looks beautiful and is ready to go so that when folks are coming into our spaces, our guest, the new person coming in, all they got to do is show up and be amazing. Right. And we've already done the work.
Well, and they feel welcomed exactly as they are.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, all right. So before we go, do you have anything else that you would like to add? Because I know that there's going to be a lot of companies that are sitting in a state of analysis paralysis that will want to know how they can reach out to you. So could you tell us that? And then also tell us just day one, what do they do this week to start making a difference in their company?
Absolutely. Okay. So yes, you can reach us very easily. Here's the name, DEIOutdoors.com. That's our website. And, we can schedule a consult with you and really get a sense. We work one-on-one with organizations and say, where are we? What does it look like? And what's our plan moving forward? Because, I really feel like this work is incredibly personal work that we do first as a human being and then as an organization. So, we fully get there's a level of vulnerability there that needs to be handled with care, right? And know that there are folks with lived experience in the industry that, in the outdoor spaces that are going to support you with this. We have trainers that have real world experience working on challenge courses and outdoor recreation companies and as facilitators of this work. So we're excited to engage with populations like for us, by us in a way, right? So the last piece, that I'll say is just for those that are like, okay, day one, what do we do, right? First, I would say breathe in and breathe out because, it's a process, right? And really take a moment because we're going to do the internal work first, right? So we'll say, where is the organizational culture at? And really do a real analysis and say, is our organizational culture separate from DEI or do they overlap? Right? If you can see that there's overlap in diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organizational culture, you're off to a good start. If it's something that you plug into human resources training every month, you might want to reevaluate, how DEI work can be integrated into your systems and practices. Yeah.
That is awesome advice, Rachel. Thank you so much again, Rachel Hailey. I appreciate you joining us. And thank you for everyone joining us on Diversity Cafe.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Diversity Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see the growth of fair recruiting, please share it with others, post it on social media, and leave a nice review. To stay caught up on all the latest, follow This Way Global on Facebook, LinkedIn, or at thiswayglobal.com.